Okay, we like to start. We're doing a Black History Month video, Cal Hills, and then we have some people from MHS as well. We're partnering to be able to put out a video. It's a little different this year. I know last year we did an assembly. MHS did the showcase. Times are different. We're all virtual now, so we wanted to be able to do something virtually and keep it safe, where we can kind of have some input. We want to talk about Black History Month, what it means to everybody. We also want to talk about some African American figures that we can relate to, we look up to. And then we kind of want to end talking about what's going on in society right now. We had a couple protests over the summer. We had George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, different events that happened that triggered the protests, and just kind of get everybody's opinion on what they think is going on in America right now. All right, so we'll just start by talking about Black History Month. What does Black History Month mean to everybody? We can just popcorn style if anybody wants to start.
So I want to go ahead and go first. When I hear Black History Month, it's something that sits with me, and it's very special to me because Black History Month is where I'm able to see people who look just like me everywhere, and they're celebrated for their accomplishments, and it's not swept under the rug. So when I first think of Black History Month, the first thing that comes to mind is Martin Luther King because of all the inclusion and bringing us together. So that would be my first thought when I hear Black History Month.
Okay, okay, very, very good. Does anybody else have any thoughts about Black History Month?
Yes, to add on to what Jaden was saying, I think that History Month means, finally recognizing some of the change makers that brought us to where we are today, such as Angela Davis, Sojourner Truth, and Martin Luther King Jr. I think it's definitely evolved from previous years growing up. I think that I'm finally being taught a lot more about some of the activists that we weren't taught. I still think that there's a long ways to go. I think that we should be learning this history not only in Black History Month, but throughout the entire year. But yeah, Black History Month is an amazing month.
I definitely think that's an important point that you made in regards to not letting it be only 1 month. I think it's very important that we look at recognizing, Black history 12 months out of the year. I'm happy that we do have 1 month that we can kind of hone in and say, hey, who are the people that we want to, remember? But we do want to make sure that we're looking at African American figures throughout the whole year, not just 1 month. So that's very good. I think Black History Month means a lot to me, just different from when I was in elementary school to now. As your point that you just mentioned, we learn about Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, those main figures. But also for me, as I got older, I was able to kind of dig deeper. W.B. Du Bois, dig deeper. Marcus Garvey, dig deeper. Sojourner Truth. You start learning about people that they might not have taught you when you were in school. And so I think it's good to take it, a step further. Also for people who aren't African American, whatever culture that you identify with, learn about the people that are important in your culture. Learn about the important figures, and that's very important. So it's not just necessarily saying Black history, and if you're not Black, not being able to identify whatever culture you identify with, know those figures that's in your culture, because it's very important. So I think what I want to do, Black History Month, we touched on that. Now we also heard about a couple figures like Angela Davis, Sojourner Truth. Those are very good, prominent African American women. I think Sojourner Truth is a very important figure when you think about women's rights. You really can't mention women's rights without bringing Sojourner Truth into that conversation. So I do know we have some ladies that's in this group. Just talk to us about, the importance of women's rights. Somebody like Sojourner Truth that really paved the way for that, to be able to have equal pay, equal rights for women. How do you feel about having prominent African American women, just like Michelle Obama, that are being successful? Does that help empower each one of you?
I think it totally does. Growing up, I never really saw anyone who looked like me in these great positions, like Kamala Harris and Michelle Obama. So I think it's really great that now, as I'm older, I get to not only see it, but I get to appreciate it for what it really is. And I just think that's really great.
Definitely, definitely. I appreciate that. I know, for example, for me, when we look at Barack Obama, President Barack Obama, when I was in school, if you said you wanted to be the president, a teacher would laugh at you. Or somebody say that's not possible. But now that we see that it's definitely possible, it just can kind of inspire, uplift, African American people like myself, or even students, to say, hey, anything is truly possible if I'm African American. There's really no barriers on what I can accomplish. And so I do agree that I think being able to have African American men and women in high places definitely is motivating, most definitely. Um, I think about other figures, when we're talking about people such as, like I said, W.E.B. Du Bois and like Booker T. Washington. They talked about the difference between trades and sharpening up your trade skills versus kind of like going to college and getting educated in that route. Is there any thoughts or opinions in regards to going to college and necessarily getting degrees and feeling like you need degrees to be successful? Or do you think that you can be able to go into a trade and be successful going into a trade as well? Is there any thoughts about that one way or the others? Is there thoughts to saying you should get a degree and go that route? Or does anybody feel like you can get a trade and be just as successful with a trade?
If I may, just being older and seeing it from kind of both perspectives, because I was raised after right after the baby boomer, so I'm Generation X. So there was a one of the benefits of going to trade is that you do understand and learn how to work or whatnot. But when we were growing up, they wanted most of the young people to go to college because even though you did have a trade, now again, this is 40, 50 years, literally 40 years ago. So when you did have a trade, you didn't really have, you were a worker. You weren't being trained on the other aspects of, life and the world. And that's kind of what W.E.B. Du Bois was trying to point out was, it expands your horizon versus, just having a trade or just being, in that particular lifestyle. There's nothing wrong with it. It was just a different mindset back then. So, again, when you bring it up and fast forward to the 21st century, I think now the best thing is a combination of both. Is you have a specific trade that you're interested in, and then you also obtain your higher degree, or even your higher degree, and that's called like career technical education now. And so I think it's very important that you look at both avenues now, especially your 21st century generation, because remember the trades back when I was younger were limited. Now there are more trades, there are more openness from even coding in the computer industry, especially out here. So I think from that perspective, you have to. It's really complicated because you can make good money, but you're just limited in your knowledge base. So
True, true. I do think that it's a catch 22 in a way, right? Because you can be successful doing both. It just depends on whatever you put your mind to. You definitely can be successful doing both. And I do think that back then the conversation, debate was very rich, but it was very different, right? You had two different mindsets, two very intelligent African American gentlemen that really, it's unfortunate they had to work against each other in a way, right? Because if they came together and really, collabed, I think it could have been even more powerful. Um, but nevertheless, I do feel that it was necessary at that time period because they were able to bring in multiple different people. You had people that felt strongly with what education was and wanted to go that route, but then you also had people that felt, strong about the trade aspect. But I don't think that anybody, one way or another, um, came up short. I think they all, were successful. Between Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois, they both were successful, and the people that followed them, I think, were successful as well. Go
and
ahead.
real quick, and you can see the success of Booker T apparently by the college that he created. And that
Definitely,
college is still going today. So he
definitely,
was in favor of college, but it was more of a specific learning style versus
definitely.
W.D. Du Bois, which is again, and if you look at it, it is abstract, meaning you're reading a book to gain knowledge, but you're not learning a trade per se. So but it's different now, and thank goodness it is.
That's very true. When he started Tuskegee, it was very important from the standpoint of um, it's still a university. Like, we're talking about trade, but he still created a university. Kimani, did you have something to say?
Yes, I have to go to work now.
Okay. Thank you for coming in, Kimani.
You're welcome. Okay, bye. Bye, Mr. Wilson. Nice seeing you.
And just
Oh,
not
go
to
ahead.
belabor a point, but to emphasize, if you guys want to actually find out their story, for W.E.B. Du Bois, pick up the book Souls of Black Folks,
Definitely.
and for Booker T, pick Up from Slavery. That's his autobiography. And when you read both of them, like you said, you'll get a different understanding of both of their philosophies from way back when. Quick question: what year did the NAACP start?
Was it 1903?
That's a good. Oops, that's a good one. Nyla, stop googling. Jasmine, stop googling. That's a good one.
It was early 19s. I want to say 1910,
Ooh, good one.
19,
Oh nine,
1909.
1909.
Okay.
1909. Good one. That was just the random Black
Yeah, I
History
knew I
question.
knew it was in the first 10 years.
Yep.
First 10 years. I just was trying to remember exactly which year. And that's still going on right now. So, you look at things that's standing the test of time, that's still going on, right?
Yep.
And still advocating. So that's definitely, something that's very important. There's a lot of things that have come and gone, but it's still around. So,
Yep.
and W.B. Du Bois was one of the instrumental people in the NAACP. So that's definitely something great. All right. So transitioning on, is there anybody as far as African American scholars? I know we just talked about maybe 3 or 4 different ones, but is there anybody like in the music industry, or is there anybody that's acting? Does anybody know that you um think have done good deeds in America? I mean, I could think of a couple, but I wanted to see if the group has had anybody. Or they can be also in a different industry. You know, um, I can say one thing. For example, my grandfather, he was a photographer, and he's in the Smithsonian right now. He took pictures during the civil rights movement. So I have a picture of him with Martin Luther King, taking a picture of Martin Luther King back, I want to say 1950 something, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 1960. So there might be people that's close to you that actually, were a part of like the civil rights movement, a part of important things that's in your history. So also talk to your parents and your grandparents about, people that may be within your family that have done some things as well.
Yeah, I think someone recent would be Amanda Gorman. She is someone that I definitely look up to as her being a young black girl just like me. It's awesome the way that she was able to speak at the inauguration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I think that, like literally looking at the screen and seeing someone who looks so similar to me, so close to my age, is just like so inspiring on what I can do in life. Thinking like one day I can also speak on a lawn where just weeks before people were not protesting, were rioting and, having the Confederate flag on that lawn. But she's like, was able to stand her ground and, you know, say some words so eloquently. And I just think that she's someone that we should definitely recognize right now, especially in Gen Z.
Definitely, because that's a name too that some people weren't aware of, right? Before the event, a lot of people did not know who she was, right? And so that was definitely something to be able to listen to and really feel good about, right? So those are some good people that we have named. I think to transition a little bit, one to kind of talk about last time we did the assembly, it was in February, and then we had, the COVID and the pandemic. We went on break in March, and then there were some things, that transpired over the summer. There were some events. We had like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, to name a few, and it started a chain or protest where people protested for African American rights. But there was not only African Americans that were protesting; there was people from all races that joined in on the protest in different cities throughout the United States. It was really big in that there was multiple cities that had big protests going on. Just views or thoughts about that. Does anybody have any opinions or thoughts in regards to this current state of America? As an African American student, 17, 18 years old, what are your thoughts and feelings about what's going on as you look at, okay, potentially going to college or graduating in the near future. What are your thoughts about what's going on in America?
I'm definitely, to touch on the protests, I'm only like 15, so I have never really seen a whole lot of protests like that. And I thought it was really cool that there were so many people of all races everywhere supporting Black Americans in those protests and supporting George Floyd and what happened to him and Breonna Taylor. Um, so I thought that was very, very cool. And I I'm sorry. I just thought that gave me a really good sense of community because I didn't really see a whole lot of that growing up either. In elementary school, there were maybe 3 Black kids in the classroom, and same for middle school. And then as I got to high school, that kind of was the same thing happening too. So I thought it was really cool that I could flip on the TV and there were so many people everywhere supporting that.
Great point. I grew up in Oakland, so when I was in elementary school, middle school, and high school, when I looked to my left, there was an African American student. When I looked to my right, there was an African American student. When I looked in front of me, for the most part, there was African American student. I went to school where it was probably 80% African American. So that's very a good point that you mentioned about not going to school with a lot of people that look like you. That's definitely not something that I really went through when I was in school, but being in this area where San Jose, Milpitas is definitely different than Oakland. Just like Mr. Wilson grew up in San Francisco, it's definitely different even in San Francisco. So I definitely appreciate that viewpoint because that is true. The comfort level becomes different when you're one of few, not one of many. So I do think that's a good point. Is there anybody else that has any thoughts about where America is right now, the protests, how did it make you feel? What your thoughts were about the protests?
Um, Gotta go real quick.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Well, because like as you mentioned, growing up in San Francisco and being a little older, I was old enough to remember the Rodney King after the verdict. So, in essence, especially if you guys know people in my age group, they'll tell you that, some things have changed, but overall a lot of things haven't changed, especially the interactions between people of color and the police. And not just the George Floyd was your Rodney King. And I'll say that because if when we saw the video, we've always heard stories. Growing up in the Bay Area, it is not as intense as it is in the Midwest, in the South, and even the East Coast. But it happens out here. Don't let them fool you. It happens out here. I'll say 2 words to Brother Payne, Rough Riders. You know what I'm talking about. So it happens out here. And so again, when we saw Rodney King, again, our dads, uncles tell us, some tell, most older adult male, black male, brown males will tell you, don't with the police, leave them alone, whatever, go away or whatnot. In some cases, you can't do that. But one of the ill things that happened, again, we used to hear the stories, oh, the police will beat you, they'll beat you. And when we saw the video of Rodney King, that just solidified it for us, how it solidified it for you young people who saw what happened to George Floyd. And so it's a continuation. Yes, things have gotten a little better. Yes, black and brown folks have a little more rights, but still, you're still viewed as the enemy, especially in certain areas. And as mentioned, not there's nothing against, the South Bay, but again, we're a small percentage down there. So there are times when, you're going to get pulled over and looked at like, hey, why are you in Cupertino? Oh, no offense to the Cupertino people, you know what I'm saying? But affluent areas tend to, want to keep out people that don't look like them. So that, again, just looking at the perspective of an older person from when it happened to Rodney King to now, it's like, dang, ain't nothing changed.
Yeah, I can't agree more with Mr. Wilson with I guess we heard it, that there was racism and that with police officers and things like that. But kind of growing up in a bubble in Milpitas, it didn't seem like anything that we'd ever experienced. But once the video got out with George Floyd, that was the point where all the young people and really everyone who hadn't experienced it or seen acts like that before were like, what? Like, this is real. And that was just, just such a hateful thing to do. But then going into the march, with leading the march in Milpitas, I was expecting maybe 10 people at most, really just being my friends and family. And then the next thing you know, there was over 5,000 people at Milpitas High School bunched up together. And that's when, like Jasmine was saying, I felt community. People of all different colors, people of all different ages, teachers, staff, people from even other communities that came down. So I think that was an awesome thing that happened from the Black Lives Matter movement, is that we were able to see, that we have a lot more support than what I thought before. I didn't really think Milpitas had that much support for the Black community, but I was proven wrong, and that's awesome. So, yeah.
I just wanted to touch briefly on what Nyla said. Um, I couldn't agree more. I When I was younger, I grew up in San Jose, and it was still, maybe it's just the area I lived in over there, but it was still, there were no black kids like ever. So I would experience like racism and people projecting stereotypes on me all the time. But I was so young, I just didn't really know what that was or what they were saying. But I knew enough that it hurt my feelings or that it didn't feel right. And then my mom visited Atlanta, and there were black people everywhere. And I remember I was like 9, maybe 10. And I remember saying, why are there so many black people? Like, where'd all these black people come from? And so then I come to Milpitas High, and I moved to Milpitas. And I remember feeling very, again, I was older now though, so I did know what racism was, and I knew what stereotypes were. And I felt very put off by how many people were comfortable saying these things to my face, behind my back, all around me. And yeah, I was taught all the time in school about protests and racism with the police. And I just experienced so many things that I didn't know of what they were. And so when I saw the George Floyd video, it made it all click for me really on what was happening around me and what the people around me were saying. And so I started to distance myself from people. And so it does feel very much like when one good thing happens for the Black community, a bad thing happens. And so it feels kind of like we're stuck going back and forth. But overall, it does feel good to become more aware of the things happening around me and to see so many people support that.
Well said. Well said. That's definitely true. I think one thing that's pretty crazy is growing up in Oakland. There was a lot of African Americans around me. Oakland is a very vibrant. Well, and especially in the '80s, '70s, '80s, '90s, it was very vibrant. You had the Black Panther Party that started in Oakland, and you had different events that would go on in Oakland, throughout the year. But one thing I can say is that growing up in Oakland and being around African Americans, that did not, what's the best way to say it? That did not, prevent me from dealing with racism, right? There's racism even in Oakland, even though there's a lot of African Americans that were in Oakland, you still dealt with racism in Oakland. And you deal with it when you go outside of Oakland as well. But to your point about Atlanta, that's very true. I know my first time going into Atlanta, just being in the airport, it looks different. I'm in Atlanta airport, and you look around, you see quite a bit of African Americans. You go to some other airports, you don't see as many. Just that before I even got into the city, kind of opened my eyes. And then once you get into the city of Atlanta, you see a lot of African American businesses, vibrant businesses that are highly successful, and I think that's definitely motivation. um but it's different in America right now, just in general, because I feel like with the protests that's going on in America that we had this summer, what that really showed us was that we're not by ourselves. Like, just like what you were saying in Milpitas when you did the protest, there's not 500 necessarily people that are African American that you thought would come to the protest, but together collectively, I think that also ties into just the district. The district has a slogan like the culture of we, and I think being able to tie everything together as a community, knowing that we're not alone, knowing that other people stand beside us and want to support us, in things that they feel are unjust or not right. And I think that that was good that you were able to see that, when you had the protest, that you weren't alone. And I think too that it can be a culture shock, right? When you're in a city that is like Atlanta, and then you come to a place like San Jose. That's a big difference. Um, But I think that the more we can have these conversations and the more that we can be able to have the dialogues about what's going on, I think the better it can be. Because I think last summer definitely showed us that outside of just us, when other people can support us, it definitely can be very powerful. There were laws that were changed. There were, statues taken down. There were name changes on teams. There was different things that were going on. The NBA, the NFL, sports, you know, protests, players not playing games, to be able to support a cause. And I think that goes a long way. It's not the end all be all, but I think that it's very important that we keep talking about some of these issues. I think that the biggest thing is let's not only talk about it when something negative takes place, right? Let's not have to have a George Floyd situation for us to want to go protest necessarily or stand up. Let's think about what are some of the injustice that's going on right now and speak up about it, not wait till somebody loses their life for us to speak up. I think that's the biggest thing for me is let's not wait till a Michael Brown, or a George Floyd or those situations happen for us to feel like we have to speak up about things that we feel aren't right. But we also have to ask the question, what can we do? Just in the community, how can we continue the conversation? Like what things can we do from the ground up to be able to help support our fellow people that's coming in, especially like if you're new to the district, for example, what can we do to help support, as a community to help support students to where they can get connected with the different people that look like them. That's just, kind of an idea. I don't know, Mr. Wilson, if you had anything else in regards to that.
Being here in the district for the last like 15, 16 years, one of the things that I think is important and what we tried to do was, and I think it now has happened, is just the expansion of the African American community within Milpitas. We not only have community members who help us out, but we also have the board of the school board, and other people who are willing to you know showcase African Americans in even in this small community. I mean, if it wasn't for the pandemic, we usually would have our annual breakfast that's been going on for the last 10 years. So I think it's introducing students, it's having organizations that are out there that people can see that when black folks do come into the area, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, they got BSU over at Cal Hills and MHS. Oh, they got the African American parent association, brother Brian, he be running, it's word of mouth. And I think especially with black folks, you really have, it has to be word of mouth. Sometimes, you try to post it on this, that, and the third, it doesn't get out there. But if it's people saying, if it's Jasmine and Nyla saying, hey, we got this going on, we got that going on. If it's her brother who's a sophomore, and then we have people in middle school who are like, oh, I can't wait to get up to, see Jacob up at the high school. He's going to be running the BSU, or if it's going down to elementary and we talking to the teachers, Miss Satan, like, hey, we got high school kids who want to come down to the elementary. People will see that, and it'll grow the community a little more, and it'll be more togetherness too. We try not to be, but more together, I think.
Definitely, definitely. And I think that even for this year, everything was virtual. We wanted to be able to do some things, but we only could do so much. But I think this is definitely a starting point. We wanted to create a video that just talked about Black history, Black History Month, what's going on. In the community. Also, some African American prominent figures that we know we look up to, and we look forward to being able to do more things as things open up. But we do want to let everybody know that the BSU with Cal Hills and MHS is working together. We're supporting one another, and we wanted to collaborate with this video to just kind of let the district know and the schools know that we are working toward supporting the BSU at both school sites. So I definitely, thank Mr. Wilson, Jasmine, Nyla for coming in, Jaden, Kimani, for being able to join and being a part of this. And we look forward to releasing more things. Like I said, we don't want to limit this to just 1 month. So we'll put this video out, but we also look forward to doing other events before the school year is over, to support the African American, culture and heritage. So we thank everybody for being able to look at this video, and we will be in touch.